Welcome back to Global Media Network LLC. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And on today's show, lest we forget historical, with host Lillian Baldwin, we are going to present 3 different opinions worldwide from politicians and laymen about how they feel about aging, not only in U.S. government politics, but from all over the world. Shall we begin? Should there be an age limit anywhere, but especially in the United States, in our government, serving the people who put them into office? President Biden is 82. If he's elected, he will leave office at 86. Former President Trump is currently 73. He will be 77 if he becomes president, and even his 80s if he receives a second term. The Senate Majority Leader is 72. A consensus taken during 2020 to 2022 noted that politicians in the legislative U.S. House of Representatives were 20 years older than the average citizen. In the House, the age of members rose in the past 4 decades. So how does being old affect our government and the citizens of our country? More importantly, how do the younger voters, 18 to 35, feel? It's been debated hotly now for a decade. In September, CBS took a poll and showed that Americans were concerned over the age crisis. 47% of the citizens state that having young people in office would make our political system better. A recent Reuters/iPost poll took in November 2022 found 9 out of 10 Americans support a cutoff age of 75 years old serving as president. In a new book, Youth Without Representation, the authors write about underrepresentation in cabinets, parliaments, and, yes, the U.S. government. The authors found that youth, 35 years and younger, lacked representation on youthful measures necessary to balance out an equal government for all countries. And they're scarce, young people, hard to find, even with a magnifying glass. Worldwide, it's hard to find representation for 18 to 35 by a factor of 3. From the book, and from the authors who come from the conversation.com, they interviewed the Prime Minister of New Zealand, who stated, and I quote, "I think the old age of legislatures is a problem. We have the world's largest generation ever of youth. So if decisions are being made by age cohort that is decades above that and is not attuned to the perspective, I think it's a serious democratic deficit. I used to be of the view that people needed to come into Parliament with some degree of maturity and background. I actually no longer believe that. I think a Parliament is a place where young people with fresh perspectives should be. And I think our political system should accommodate that." Now, that is from the Many people who make up the conversation, and you can find that on theconversation.com. This is another opinion from Bing Artificial Intelligence. And it said, ageism in politics is a complex issue that has been discussed various ways. It is discrimination based on negative assumptions about age. It can have an impact on older people's lives and a serious issue. Age has long been a powerful political weapon, and it's been used against politicians of all ages. For instance, our current president, Joe Biden, has been a target of ageist attacks, which reinforce outdated stereotypes and hurt younger people too. Similarly, California Senator Dianne Feinstein and Wilbur Ross, President Trump's former Commerce Secretary, have also been subjected to similar questions about their age. However, gerontocracy, gerontocracy, or a government consisting of leaders who are much older than the general population, has Americans of various political persuasions wondering whether elective officials should be subject to age limits. More than 50% of Americans prefer restricting individuals over a certain age from serving. Well, you're not allowed to run for president now until you're 35 years old, because they believe that maturity and experience one must have before applying to become the president of the United States. It is important to note that age-based attacks against politicians demonstrate how common ageist stereotypes are in American culture and the world, and how they can shape the attitudes that people have about their own aging process. It is crucial to recognize that people are living longer and are often at the maximum cognitive capacity deeper into old age. Therefore, it is essential to reframe aging in contemporary politics and address the changing demographics of the aging population. That reminds me of an old wives' tale that was told when I was in my 20s. And it went something like this. A huge tribe of people lived in a settlement. And after a while, they outgrew the settlement. Now, there were a lot of older people there. And the younger people felt if they took the older people with them, it would slow them down and keep them from finding their new Shangri-La. So they elected to leave the old people back and let them survive the best they can. And the group went forward. Several months later, they found a valley that fit them perfectly. And yet, the first 2 days they were there, people died. And they couldn't understand it. So they finally sent a runner back to collect what remained of the old people they left behind to starve to death. And they brought one lone old woman, and she went and inspected the land, and very, very carefully, she tasted the water and told them that they couldn't drink the water. It had a slight salt tinge to it. It was not fresh. What's the moral? The moral is that an older, aged person left to die knew better than to just rush in and take over a land you are not familiar with. The third opinion is from the BBC, and they asked the question, should we be worried about older politicians? They point out that the top contenders for the U.S. president election are well past the typical retirement age. So what are the trade-offs of being led by older politicians? Pauline Newman, who is currently 96, holds a lifetime position as a U.S. federal judge. Although she wants to continue working, she's in the midst of lawsuits with colleagues who want her to retire. The U.S. has become a hotspot for debates about whether people in the political arena can be too old to lead. Apart from this fact that we're speaking about gerontocracies, gerontocracies, societies governed by older people, are typically not representative of their population. Other concerns. 1, mental fitness. Neuroscience and psychology suggest that cognitive performance varies widely as people grow older. Take a look at the commercials for the products that are supposed to help you think better, remember better, have better cognitive ability. Therefore, making it tricky to determine whether someone can actually be too old to lead. And while some skills tend to decline with age, others improve. Some superagers even possess the mental acuity of people many decades younger than themselves. So how old is too old? Or is that the wrong question? How does aging affect the brain? Brain volume diminishes over time. In healthy people, the prefrontal cortex is the region of the brain with the most age-related volume loss of roughly 5% per decade. Through its connections to other parts of the body, it helps manage executive function, a complex set of mental processes that have been likened to a thermostat or the conductor of a symphony. The conductor gets in and, of course, leads the various instruments to blend in so it sounds like it's one musical note. So this is part of the key to discussion of leadership capabilities because it involves areas like problem solving, goal setting, and impulse control. Executive function declines gradually during a person who is 30s. And this accelerates as we enter our 70s. White matter disease is a group of condition caused by damage to the white matter in the brain. It also contributes to executive dysfunction and affects about a third of people aged 65 and older. Executive dysfunction can show up in a reduced impulse control and increased repetition of thoughts and behaviors. Think about the President of the United States, for example, and the red phone and the red button. A significant portion of people over 65 have some impairment of executive function. Quote, I think as a general breakpoint, 65 is reasonable, Mark Fisher said, who directs the Center for Neuropolitics at the University of California in Irvine. Other structural changes in the brain become solidified around this age as well. Mental processing speed has been shown to decline from the age of 60 in a study using U.S. data. The very loose threshold of 65 applies to the U.S., where the overall life expectancy at birth is 76. However, it may be different in other countries with markedly different life expectancies and health systems. The life expectancy for men in the U.S. is 73. This is lower than in the top countries, but much higher than the life expectancy of 60 for men in Cameroon, whose president, 90-year-old Paul Biya, is said to be the world's oldest national leader. At 77, former President Donald Trump is more than a decade older than the normal retirement age. Life expectancy at birth doesn't tell the full story of longevity, as this number is brought down by factors like infant mortality. For example, an 80-year-old in the U.S. could expect to live another decade. In reality, there is no hard and fast rule. A person will be affected by the decline of executive function, particularly when you factor in that we don't have all the same proficiency. So what are the benefits of an older brain? Fisher explains, averages can obscure expectations of healthy longevity and cognitive fitness, given what he calls the, quote, tremendous individual variability, unquote, in executive function. The battery of testing would be the best way to formally determine one's executive function, but there is going to be wide variation of terms of how individuals function, Fisher said. One differentiator is comorbidities, comorbidities, multiple conditions like heart disease, high cholesterol, and hypertension, high blood pressure. All of these can impact brain function, particularly executive function. And while aging does not always come with illness, it makes it more likely. According to Fisher, quote, hypertension is probably, along with aging itself, the most important, most impactful factor on brain aging as a whole and executive function as well, unquote. Thus, early diagnosis and treatment of hypertension is an important area of intervention to protect brain health. And this is an area where treatments and knowledge are regularly improving. There's also a variation in which parts of the brain can compensate for others that show some age-related damage. While the brain is believed to be plastic, many of us can partially make up for disruptions in one part of our brain by enlisting other parts of the network. Others will experience a failure of comprehension along the lines of Alzheimer's disease, explains Mark Mapstone, a translational neuroscientist at University of California, Irvine. However, take note, there are some aspects where an older brain actually shows better performance. With the ability to take in new information declines much earlier, the ability to direct and act on information can improve well into a person's 70s. So while 70-year-olds can probably process new information more slowly than their 30-year-old counterparts, they may do better at synthesizing it. Mapstone says that 60-year-olds typically have better vocabulary than 20-year-olds and can thus substitute words better. For example, one study found that vocabulary scores increased into a person's mid-60s. Quote, what happens with older brains is that they get better as what is called crystallized intelligence, unquote, Rose McDermott, who specializes in political psychology at Brown University, said, you have these kind of established schemas and ways of thinking about things, and you're able to integrate new information into existing structures much more readily and in many cases creatively than you can when you're younger, because you don't sit on the same degree of knowledge base. There are some people who are known as, quote, super agers, unquote, which retain the cognitive functions of much younger people. These are people in their 80s and older, with the cognitive health of those 2 to 3 decades younger. Superagers show larger, healthier neurons in the anterolateral cortex, a part of the brain critical to memory. They do better on memory tests than their peers. Also, physical activity, mental stimulation, and social connections are all important to preserve brain tissue and brain function. Political leadership does provide at least the mental challenge and social connection parts. And powerful people are also likely to have many privileges, including financial security and access to excellent health care. Some scientists consider leaders like Biden to be superagers. Barbara Sahakian, a professor of clinical neuropsychology at the University of Cambridge, said, quote, cognitive flexibility in thinking and problem solving is an essential form of cognition for political leaders to excel at in order to make good quality decisions under certainty and risk. These types of decisions are often time limited, unquote. However, this cognitive flexibility usually dwindles over time. The question I am going to leave my audience with is, should political leaders undergo cognitive screening? Text me at 484-364-1032 or email us at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Thank you very much for listening to the 3 different opinions, theconversation.com, bbc.com, and Bing AI chat. The URLs for our opinions will be listed on the blog should you want to go and take a look at them yourself. Thank you for coming back and listening to Lest We Forget with your host, Lillian Caldwell, historical. Today we discuss ageism and politics all over the world, and are our younger people being left behind because there are older politicians who are ruling/governing the country. You can listen to this, Lest We Forget historical, all over again at youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio at https://www.passionateworldtalkradio.com, iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon. Check us out at Spreaker.com/PWR network. And remember, come back next week. A hint, the next time you go and get a blood test and they stick the needle in your arm to withdraw the blood, remember this: when they bandage it, don't let the bandage remain on over that puncture wound for longer than 15 to 20 minutes, because if you do, you will cause health problems with your arm. It causes increased blood bruising and more problems, because I understand from the nurse over at the Reading Hospital in Reading, Pennsylvania, that it makes it tight, and therefore you put yourself at risk for infection. Thank you very much for listening with Lillian S. Caldwell, and lest we forget historical ageism and our politicians.